She looked him in the eye, signed the docket for 6 trademarks, and handed him off to the pit boss like a cracked valve she had already forgotten. That was her first mistake. He was nothing to look at, a middle-aged human, grey at the temples, calloused hands wrong for a soldier, and eyes wrong for a slave, catalogued as unskilled labour and sent below to patch a coolant leak on the lower deck. Vrethrilax, sub-commander of the Vrethkai Compact, did not think about Lot 412 again for 6 full station days. Then the other bidders started disappearing, and when she finally pulled the corridor footage from her own vessel, 47 seconds long, 3 armoured enforcers, 1 steel pipe wrench, she understood, in a slow, cold way, that she was the last name on a list, and that she had bought the thing that was going to erase it. 6 days earlier, the air in the auction hall on Kelthari Terminal had tasted of copper filings, burned ozone, and cheap grain paste. The auction hall was a low iron room shaped like a slaughter chute, and Vrethrilax hated it the way a surgeon hates a butcher's stall. She stood in the observation gallery with her tail coiled against the rail, the 4 narrow slits of her nostrils flaring against the smell of unwashed livestock and the sour animal fear of 500 captured beings from 20 different worlds. Her translator ran quietly against her jaw. Her second, an under-officer named Kesith Val, stood a respectful pace behind her with the data slate ready. On the docket for the day were 41 lots, and Vrethrilax needed 1, a lung augment specialist for the pressurized wing of her house on the homeworld. She had marked 3 lots she wanted and was going to be gone before lunch. She was not going to buy an unskilled human. The auctioneer called Lot 412, and the pit boss led a man onto the plate. He walked in like he owned the plate. Not proud, not bold, just a man walking. The pit boss shoved him toward the light, and he went with the shove, weight settling on his heels the way a heavy tool settles into a heavy hand. He was middle-aged for his species. 39, the tag said. Grey at the temples, dark at the crown, a jaw that had been broken once and reset without vanity. He had the flat blue eyes of a person who had spent a long time looking at cold water in bad weather. His hands were the wrong hands for a slave, wide across the knuckles, seamed at the palms, one thumb slightly crooked from an old crush injury. Furnace hands, machine hands. He looked at the auction hall the way a man looks at a broken boiler. Not afraid, not angry, just cataloguing what was wrong with the room. The auctioneer read the manifest. Curtis Webb, age 39, seized from a drifting survey vessel 3 station cycles previous. No combat classification, no augmentation, no genetic modification of note. Skill set listed as furnace technician, industrial boiler certification, coolant systems, plumbing, low atmosphere welding. Catalogued as unskilled labour for auction purposes because the Kelthari brokers did not consider a species that still ran on chemical fuel to have skills. Vrethrilax was not paying attention. She was looking at her slate. A rival house opened at 4 trademarks. Someone in the back counted at 5. The auctioneer scanned for a 3rd bid and got nothing. The auctioneer prepared to close. Kesith Val leaned forward. Sub-Commander, the lower deck coolant coupling. We do not have a plumber. If we can buy a plumber for 6 trademarks and not have to hire a specialist off the terminal at 40 a day. Vrethrilax made a small sound of impatience and raised her data slate. 6 trademarks. The auctioneer took it in a bored voice, waited 3 seconds for a counter that did not come, and hammered. Lot 412 was hers. She did not look at him again for 6 days. The human was brought aboard the serrated Compass that same afternoon, walked past the guard station without incident, and handed a maintenance smock, a translator loop, and a service badge for the lower decks. He was catalogued in the crew register under indentured labour and given a bunk in the below-decks berth. The berth master reported to Kesith Val that the human had asked exactly 2 questions on arrival: where the tool crib was and whether the water on the ship was potable for a human. The birthmaster had not known the answer to either question and had told him to figure it out. The human had said thank you and walked off to find both. The coolant coupling on the lower deck was fixed by the end of the human's first shift. It had been leaking for 11 days, and 3 engineers had failed to seat the fitting because the alloy was Vrethkai and the tool set in the below-deck's crib was mostly Kelthari surplus. The human had wandered the corridors for 2 hours, opened every unlocked storage closet he could find, come back with a 40-centimeter pipe wrench of clearly human manufacture, steel, blunt, unpainted, the head stamped with a mark none of the crew could read, and reseated the coupling in 6 minutes. He had cleaned up the coolant, wiped his hands on a rag, and asked the berthmaster where he could get a cup of coffee. The berthmaster had said there was no coffee. The human had said okay. He had asked for tea. The berthmaster had said there was grain paste. The human had said okay, without any visible disappointment, and gone to bed. That was day 1. Days 2 through 5, the human worked. He patched fittings, replaced gaskets, tightened bulkhead brackets, rewired a burnt sensor loop in the port ballast bay, and taught 2 of the below-deck's crew how to use a torque wrench correctly. He did not complain. He did not attempt to escape. He ate what was given to him. He slept in the bunk he was given. He spoke to the crew in short, polite sentences through the translator loop. He asked about the ship's coolant chemistry and made a small suggestion about pressure that shaved 12 minutes off the daily circulation cycle. HFY filed a note about the human's competence, marked it low priority, and forgot to send it. On the evening of day 5, 3 enforcers came aboard the serrated compass through the aft service lock. They came for the lot the losing bidder had lost. There was a protocol for these situations. The losing bidder in the auction hall had been a mid-tier procurement house from the Pallid Belt, and they had wanted lot 412 specifically. They had bid 5 and been outbid at 6, and their retainer had told them lot 412 was worth 12, minimum. The retainer had not explained why. The procurement house had sent enforcers to recover the lot by extra-legal means, and had done so through channels that suggested they expected no resistance from a Vrethkai vessel over a piece of unskilled labor. The 3 enforcers were competent. 2 Kelthari, 1 Draxi, plasma lattice body shields, phase disruptors sidearm, close-quarter melee blades on the hip. They cut through the aft lock in 8 minutes, keyed the crew register for the human's berth number, and moved through the service corridor toward the below decks. They met Curtis Webb in a maintenance junction on E-deck. He was on his way to a coolant fitting. He had the Crestline pipe wrench in his right hand and a rag in his left. When the 3 enforcers came around the bend, phase disruptors already raised. Plasma shields humming, the human stopped walking, tilted his head slightly, and looked at them the way a man looks at a leaking pipe. The lead enforcer said through his own translator, "Lot 412, you are being recovered. Do not resist." The human said, "You've got the wrong deck." The lead enforcer fired. The plasma bolt hit the wall behind the human's shoulder because the human had already moved. He had not dodged. He had stepped. 1 step, left, weight low, the way a man steps around a puddle. The lead enforcer registered the miss and began to correct. Curtis Webb closed the distance in 1 long stride and drove the head of the Crestline pipe wrench down through the plasma shield. The shield sang. The shield did not stop the wrench. Plasma lattice shields were designed to disperse the energy of a directed discharge. They were tuned to bleed the heat of a phase disruptor, to catch and diffuse the plasma of a lance, to soften the arrival of a coherent energy weapon. They were not designed to stop a 2-kilogram lump of steel moving at the end of a man's arm. The wrench passed through the shield with no more resistance than a hand passing through a wet curtain, and struck the lead enforcer above the crest of his skull with the full weight of the human behind it. There was a sound. It was not a good sound. The lead enforcer went down in one piece and stayed down. The second enforcer, the Draxi, was faster. He got his disruptor up and fired twice. The first bolt scored a burn line along Curtis Webb's left tricep. The second missed by a hand's width because Curtis Webb was already inside the shield perimeter, wrench coming back up in a short, flat arc. He hit the Draxi in the throat. Draxi throats were the softest tissue on the species, and the wrench crushed the enforcer's larynx and the vertebrae behind it in one motion. The enforcer went to his knees, hands at his throat, phase disruptor forgotten. Curtis Webb hit him again on the way down at the base of the skull without hurry. The Draxi stopped moving. The third enforcer, the Kelthari, was in the wrong position. He had been guarding the rear of the formation and had a clean firing lane for 2 full seconds. He used those 2 seconds to stare. Later, watching the footage, Vrethrelax would time him with the frame counter. 2 seconds, 1 full breath, of a trained enforcer watching a middle-aged human with a pipe wrench kill 2 of his colleagues and not raising his weapon. By the time the third enforcer raised his weapon, Curtis Webb was already crossing the junction toward him. The enforcer got 1 shot off. It hit the human in the meat of the left shoulder and rocked him back half a step. He absorbed the hit like a man absorbing a heavy door and kept coming. The enforcer fired again and missed because his hand had begun to shake. He tried to draw the melee blade with his offhand. He was still drawing it when the pipe wrench came down. The corridor footage ran for 47 seconds from breach to end. Vrethrelax did not learn about any of it that night. The human walked back to the below-decks berth, wiped the pipe wrench on a rag, cauterized the plasma burn on his left tricep with a soldering iron from the tool crib without waking anyone, ate a bowl of grain paste, and went to bed. In the morning, he reseated a warped grating in the aft ballast bay and asked the berthmaster again whether there was any actual coffee anywhere on the ship. The berthmaster again told him no. He said, okay. The 3 bodies in the maintenance junction were discovered by a Vrethkai security patrol at 0600. Kesith Val was informed at 0612. The corridor footage was pulled at 0618. Kesith Val watched it twice in silence, then walked to Vrethrelax's ready room and stood in the doorway with the slate in his hand. Sub-Commander, Kesith Val said, the human bought yesterday for 6 trademarks. There is a matter. Vrethrelax looked up from her morning ledger with the tolerant impatience of a superior officer being interrupted with something trivial. Report. Kesith Val handed her the slate. Vrethrelax watched the footage all the way through. Then she watched it again. Then she paused it at the frame, where the pipe wrench passed through the plasma shield, magnified the image, and looked at it for a long time. She said, where is the human now? Below decks, working. He is fixing a warped grating in the ballast bay. Is he aware that we know? No, Sub-Commander. Has he attempted to leave the ship? No, Sub-Commander. He has requested coffee twice. Vrethrelax handed the slate back. Her second's fingers were, she noticed, unsteady. Bring the below-decks berthmaster to me, also the tool crib manifest, also the xenobiology file on the species Homo sapiens, also the buyer manifest from the auction. All of it, now. Kesith Val left. Vrethrelax sat very still at her desk. Her tail, which had not moved since dawn, curled slowly around her chair leg. The Vrethkai were an old species, and she came from an old house and had watched 3 wars from the deck of a command vessel. She had seen close combat footage from 12 species. She had once, as a junior officer, watched a Draxi shock trooper cut through a Kelthari armored column with a molecular blade. She had watched combat footage of Vrethkai storm priests, her own people, doing things to captured enemies that her mother would not describe. She was not squeamish. She was not new. She had never in her career seen a piece of primitive kinetic industrial equipment pass through a live plasma shield, like the shield was not there. She spent the morning reading. The xenobiology file on humanity was thin. It had been compiled by a survey crew 4 cycles previous from short-range observation of a colony vessel and interviews with 3 humans acquired in the same market. It described the species as bipedal, endothermic, chemically fueled, socially organized in small groups, of average intelligence for a Class 3 world, with unusual tolerances for temperature extremes, pain, and prolonged physical exertion. The file noted in a subsection that humans came from a high-gravity world and possessed unusually dense skeletal structure and disproportionately large cardiac muscle. It noted a neurological quirk called stress analgesia, in which pain signals were delayed or blunted during acute physical crisis. The file classified this as a curiosity of primate biology. Under threat assessment, the file read, negligible. Breath-relax closed the file and read it again from the beginning. She noticed that the survey team had done their fieldwork on a colony vessel and had never visited the human homeworld. She noticed that the 3 humans interviewed had all been civilians. She noticed that no combat assessment had been conducted because the surveying officer had considered such an assessment unnecessary for a species that still used chemical propellant weapons. She noticed that under the section on cultural behaviors, the file made a joke about a human being observed to work in an ambient temperature that would have killed most surveyed species, and to complain about the coffee. She set the slate down. She went to the below decks alone. She found Curtis Webb in the aft ballast bay, on his back under a warped section of grating, with the crestline pipe wrench across his chest and a fresh coolant streak along his jaw. He had heard her enter and did not react. She stood at the edge of the bay with her tail low and her second nowhere in sight and watched him tighten a bolt. "Human," she said, "get up." He rolled out from under the grating, sat up, wiped his hands on the rag, and stood without hurry. He was a hand shorter than she was. He looked her in the eye without hesitation. She noted again that he was not afraid. She said, "3 enforcers came aboard my ship last night to recover you. You met them in the E-deck junction." The human nodded once. "I figured they were for me." "Did you consider reporting this to my crew?" "They shot first. There wasn't time to walk them anywhere." "You killed them with a wrench." "Only one I had." She let this stand for a moment. Then she said, "The plasma shields did not stop the wrench." He shrugged small. "Shields work on energy. Wrench isn't energy. It's just a weight on a stick." She looked at him. He looked back. His flat blue eyes were the same eyes she had looked past in the auction hall. She said, "What was your work on your homeworld?" "Boilers, furnaces, anything that gets hot and leaks." "You are a repairman." "Yes." "You have combat training." "No." "You have military service." "No." She waited. He said, "I did 4 years in a shipyard as a kid. Union work. Big pipe. There was a fight sometimes." He paused. "There was more than sometimes. But it wasn't training. You crossed a maintenance junction and killed 3 shielded enforcers in 47 seconds. Sounds about right." She said, "I am not going to punish you for defending yourself on my ship. You will be reassigned to my personal detail for the duration of this station cycle. You will report to Under-Officer Kesseth Val at 0800. You will continue to receive your labor rations and your bunk. Is this acceptable to you?" Curtis Webb looked at her for a long moment, wrench in hand, coolant on his jaw, and said, "Is there any way to get real coffee on this ship?" She said no. He said, "Okay." She left him there. By the end of that day, 4 bidders from the losing auction on Kelthari Terminal were dead. Not 4. 3 dead, 1 in medical, refusing to describe what had happened, and 1 missing. The reports came in slowly at first, then in a run. A rival house on the Pallid Belt reported the loss of a mid-tier procurement officer and 2 enforcers in a private lift on their own station. A shipping consortium out of the Tresan Reach reported that their acquisitions director had failed to return from a routine walk between his office and the docking spa and had been found later in the maintenance sub-level with a single blunt force injury to the base of the skull and no other marks. A minor freehold house from the Vrel cluster reported nothing officially, but their name went dark on the trade channels and their voting proxy stopped answering messages. And then, on the morning of day 7, a Kelthari brokerage house filed an emergency medical claim on their senior partner, who had been found in an emergency lock on a station Vrethrelax's ship was not docked at, missing 3 fingers and unable or unwilling to speak. Kesithval brought the reports to Vrethrelax at midday. Sub-Commander. She read them. She read them again. She pulled the original auction manifest and matched the losing bidders to the reports one by one. 7 bidders on lot 412, including her. 4 confirmed casualties or disappearances in 70 hours, 1 in medical and refusing to talk, 1 missing, the 7th name was hers. She said, quietly, "Where is the human?" On the command deck, he is repairing the atmosphere regulator in the aft galley. He asked this morning whether you had any coffee in your personal reserve. Vrethrelax set the slate down. She said, "Get me the human, and bring the file." Kesithval brought the human. Curtis Webb entered the ready room like a man entering an office he had been in before. He nodded to Vrethrelax. He looked at Kesithval without hostility. He stood in front of her desk, with the crestline pipe wrench slung through a work loop on his belt. She had ordered the crew not to disarm him. She was not entirely sure the crew could have. She had the xenobiology file open on the wall display, projected large. She had the auction footage queued. She had the incident reports arranged in the order they had come in, and she had the corridor footage from her own vessel paused on the frame of the second enforcer's throat coming apart. She said, "Sit down." He sat. She said, "I am going to read something to you. I want you to listen carefully." He nodded. She said, "The xenobiology file on humanity, compiled 4 cycles ago by the Kelthari Survey Bureau. This is the official assessment used by every trade guild in this quadrant when a human is offered for auction. It is the reason your species is classified as unskilled labor." She read the file aloud. Her translator ran clean, and she did not hurry. She read the section on morphology. She read the section on tolerances. She read the section on the neurological quirk called stress analgesia. She read the joke about the coffee. She said, "Under threat assessment, negligible." She looked up. Curtis Webb had listened with the polite patience of a man listening to a supervisor read out a work order. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Whoever wrote that didn't visit?" "No." "Didn't talk to any veterans?" "No." "Didn't ask anybody why we're the only ones from the neighborhood?" She paused. She said, "Explain." He shifted in the chair. He looked at the wall for a second. He said, "The people who wrote that file were looking at me the way I look at a fitting, just the specs. Diameter, wall thickness, pressure rating. They wrote down my weight and my bone density and how much oxygen I burn, and they wrote negligible because on paper we look like a slow, soft mammal from a heavy planet." He tapped the pipe wrench in the belt loop once. "Here's what they missed. We're not the strongest thing on our planet. We're not the fastest. We're not the toughest. There's a bear that'll take my head off with one paw. There's a cat that'll run me down in 100 meters. There's a snake that'll kill me with a scratch. We are none of those things. We're the thing that noticed all of them and figured out how to kill them anyway. We're a species of leaky, bleeding, slow-moving repairmen with really good hands. And we spent 40,000 years walking after everything on the planet until it fell down." He looked at her. "Your file says stress analgesia. What that actually means is I can be busted up pretty bad and keep working on the problem. Your file says dense bone. What that means is a plasma bolt has to do more heat to break me than to break a Draxi. And if I close the distance before that happens, I get to hit you with a wrench. Your file says curiosity. What that means is the survey crew didn't stay long enough to see one of us angry. He paused. We are not invincible. We bleed, we break, we die. It's just that we make the other guy die faster. The room was quiet. Vrethralax turned the wall display, slowly, to the manifest. She said, "There were 7 bidders on you. 4 are confirmed dead or missing. 1 is in medical, refusing to describe what happened. 1 is missing. I am the 7th name." He looked at the manifest. He said, "You didn't send anyone after me." "No." "Then I don't have any business with you." She said, "The person or persons who sent the first 3 enforcers may have business with me. If the pattern holds, someone will come." He looked at the manifest again. "Who coordinated the auction?" "The Kelthari brokerage. That partner is in medical." "Who paid the brokerage?" She'd already pulled that file. She turned the display. A shell house registered in the Pallid Belt. The Pallid Syndicate, coordinator on record, Overseer Thekvaras, mid-tier, based on the Keth Belt processing hub, 3 stations spinward from our current position. The Syndicate has been running human labor through this quadrant for 6 cycles. My house has bought from them twice before, without incident. Curtis Webb read the name Thekvaras off the wall display. He said it aloud once, slowly, the way a man tests the weight of a wrench before he swings it. He said, "All right." She said, "All right what?" "All right, that's who we're going to see." She said, "The Keth Belt Hub is a syndicate station. It is not a legal jurisdiction for me. I cannot enter it in my official capacity without triggering a compact review. Overseer Thekvaras is guarded by a full detachment of syndicate enforcers with 2nd-generation plasma lattice shields and phase disruptors. It is not a station I can approach with force." He said, "Does the station have a maintenance corridor?" She looked at him. "All stations have maintenance corridors. Then I can approach it." She was quiet for a long moment. She said, "You would go alone." "That's how it works. You send the plumber." She said, "Why would you do this? You owe me nothing. You owe the syndicate nothing but a debt of blood, and you could collect that from a distance. You could ask to be released. I would release you. You could take a small ship. Nobody would follow you." Curtis Webb looked at her. He said, "The syndicate flagged the survey vessel I was on. They shot the pilot. They shot a woman named Reyes, who was 3 months from her citizenship exam. They shot a kid named Amir, who was 17 and wanted to be a botanist. They shot 4 other people I knew by name, and then they sold what was left of us for 6 trademarks ahead. If I take a ship and go home, they do it again next week. So I'm going to Keth Belt. It's not for you, it's not for me, it's for Reyes." He paused. "Also, the guys they sent to your ship, if they'd been faster, would have taken me off in a crate. I don't like being in crates." She looked at him for a long time. She said, "I will arrange a transit." He said, "I'll need a few things from your tool crib." She said, "Take what you need." He nodded and got up and left. Kesith Val, who had been standing at parade rest through the entire conversation, waited until the door sealed and then said, "Sub-Commander, may I speak freely?" "Speak. That is a man." "Yes, that is one man." "Yes." Kesith Val said, "The Keth Belt Hub has a permanent guard detachment of approximately 120 enforcers. The Overseer's personal detail is 12. All 12 carry 2nd-generation plasma shields with tuned kinetic dampening. All 12 have combat scars, which on a syndicate enforcer is not decorative." Vrethralax said, "I know." "We are sending 1 furnace repairman." She said, "We are sending Curtis Webb." "Sub-Commander." Kesith Val paused. "I do not know how to write this into the mission log." She said, "You will write Vrethkai Auxiliary Asset, Kinetic Specialist, deployed in advance. That is what the file will say from this day forward." "Yes, Sub-Commander." That evening, Vrethrelax went below to the tool crib and watched Curtis Webb pack. He took the Crestline pipe wrench, of course. He took a second wrench, smaller, a two-hand torque driver that he strapped to his back inside his coat. He took a small industrial pry bar and clipped it to his belt. He took a coil of steel wire, a folding utility knife with a serrated edge, a compact soldering iron with a rechargeable cell, a spool of tape, a bag of coarse steel filings that Vrethrelax could not immediately explain, and a small pouch of what he called grit. He took a canteen. He took 2 protein bars from the below-decks galley. He asked for and received a set of unmarked coveralls in a color that would read as station standard on Keth belt. He asked for a low-power translator loop that would not identify him as a Vrethkai asset. He asked for a schematic of the Keth belt hub, and Kesithval, whose contacts were surprisingly deep, obtained one within the hour. Curtis Webb studied the schematic for 50 minutes. He asked 3 questions. He circled 2 corridors, 1 atmosphere plant and the overseer's suite. He set the schematic down. He said, "This is a boiler room with people in it. I can walk through it." Vrethrelax said, "How do you plan to enter?" "Maintenance dock on the outer ring. Every station like this leases the maintenance docks to independent contractors. You put me on a contract crew shuttle. I ride in with the coolant supply run. I sign in as a subcontracted furnace tech. I walk to a service closet. I change into the coveralls. I do a job, 2 jobs, 3 jobs. I let people see me fixing things. Nobody looks at a man fixing things. I work my way toward the overseer's suite by way of the atmosphere plant, which is on the same maintenance loop. I go up through a service shaft on the north side. I come out in the corridor outside Thekvaris's operations center. I go in." She said, "And then what?" "Then I do the work." He looked at her. "You should be somewhere else during the work. The station will file this as a maintenance accident, and there will be no witnesses that connect me to your house. That is important. If they connect me to you, this becomes a compact matter, and you go through a review. If it's just a maintenance accident and a missing subcontractor, it goes into an incident file and nobody reads it for 6 months." She stared at him. She said, "You have done this before." He said, "I've done boiler rooms before. It's the same work." She arranged the transit. The serrated compass moved to a lawful docking position 2 stations short of Keth belt, well outside the syndicate's jurisdictional bubble. A small, independent tender, chartered under a Kelthari coolant contractor Kesithval had used before, met them at the halfway rendezvous. Curtis Webb transferred to the tender at dawn on the 8th day since the auction. He carried his tools. He carried his coveralls. He carried nothing that could be traced to the Vrethkai. He did not, at Vrethrelax's insistence, carry a Vrethkai emergency beacon. He would leave the Keth belt hub the same way he entered it, on a scheduled coolant run, or he would not leave it at all. Before he stepped through the airlock, Vrethrelax said his name. He turned. She said, "Human, if you do not return, do you have any final message you wish transmitted?" He thought about it. He said, "There's a woman named Marie Webb in Duluth, Minnesota on Earth. She's my sister. If I don't come back and if you can get a message to her without exposing my address, tell her I'm sorry and tell her the wrench came home." Vrethrelax repeated the words back exactly. He nodded. He stepped through the airlock. The serrated compass pulled back to a monitoring position. Vrethrelax stayed on the bridge. She did not sleep. She did not eat. Kesithval brought her water and a thin ration of stimulant tea, and she drank both without noticing. She watched the tender ride in on the coolant run. She watched it dock in the maintenance ring on schedule. She watched the Keth belt station telemetry for anything unusual, and saw nothing. The wait ran for 4 hours and 11 minutes. During those 4 hours and 11 minutes, according to the incident file HFY would later obtain through a syndicate contact of dubious loyalty, the following things happened on the Keth Belt Hub. An unregistered subcontractor from a Kelthari coolant firm signed in at Maintenance Dock 9 and reported to the shift foreman for atmosphere plant work. He was assigned 2 minor repairs and a routine inspection on the North Loop. He completed the 2 repairs in under an hour, competently. On the inspection, he identified a fault in a bulkhead coupling that was, per the maintenance log, a legitimate issue. He requested a service key for the North Atmosphere plant to complete the inspection. The key was issued. 20 minutes later, the North Atmosphere plant registered a minor pressure irregularity. A single technician was dispatched. The technician did not report back. The pressure irregularity self-corrected within 4 minutes. 12 minutes after that, a service shaft on the north side of the operations ring reported an open access hatch. A security patrol of 2 was dispatched. Neither returned to check-in. Their transponders went silent 40 seconds apart. 6 minutes after that, the corridor outside Overseer Thekvaris's operations center reported a maintenance alert. The corridor's atmosphere sensor had picked up a small amount of coolant vapor. A cleaning drone was dispatched. The drone was destroyed by an object described in the incident file as a hand-thrown pry bar, moving with unusual velocity. 2 minutes after that, the operations center's outer door was breached. The next 3 hours of footage were partially destroyed by the syndicate before HFY's contact could retrieve them. What remained, and what Vrethrelax would watch later, in silence, in her ready room, alone, was fragmentary. Overseer Thekvaris's personal detail of 12 enforcers was in the operations center at the time of the breach. 6 of them were on active guard rotation. The other 6 were in a briefing room off the main hall. The active 6 responded immediately with plasma lattice shields raised and phase disruptors drawn. Curtis Webb entered the operations center with the Crestline pipe wrench in his right hand, the small torque driver strapped across his back, a smear of coolant across his coveralls, and a broken left arm. The broken left arm was from the service shaft. Halfway up, a rung had failed. He had fallen 4 meters onto a support brace and cracked the bone above the wrist. He had bound it to his side with the coil of steel wire and kept climbing. On the recovered footage, the arm hung crooked at his side and did not seem to concern him. The first 2 enforcers fired the moment the door opened. The first bolt went wide because Curtis Webb had already dropped into a crouch. The second bolt caught him across the ribs on the right side and blackened a strip of coverall the length of a hand. He did not stop moving. He crossed the room in a low, fast diagonal, put his shoulder into the corner of the guard station, and came up inside the first enforcer's shield perimeter with the wrench already in motion. The wrench passed through the shield. The enforcer went down. By the time the second enforcer had adjusted aim, Curtis Webb was inside his shield too. This one got the disruptor barrel into a horizontal position and fired. The bolt hit Curtis Webb along the collarbone and opened a gash to the bone. He absorbed the hit the way a boiler absorbs a hammer blow, staggered half a step, and came in again. The wrench came down. The next 4 enforcers were smart enough to back up. They put distance between themselves and the human and settled into a firing line. This should have been the moment they killed him. 4 disruptors, 1 target, 20 meters of open floor between them. Curtis Webb reached into the pocket of his coveralls, pulled out the bag of coarse steel filings, and threw it. The bag opened in the air. The steel filings scattered across the shield perimeter of all 4 enforcers. Plasma lattice shields did not know what to do with a cloud of small metallic particles that were not moving fast enough to trigger a coherent energy response. The shields registered 100 small contacts, tried to disperse 100 small heat signatures at once, and browned out for a fraction of a second in a cascading failure that a syndicate technician would later attempt to explain in a memo nobody read. Curtis Webb was inside the firing line before the shields recovered. The wrench came down 4 times. The other 6 enforcers called from the briefing room arrived at the door in time to see the last of the 4 go down. They fired from cover. Curtis Webb took a disruptor hit to the meat of his right thigh, dropped to one knee, threw the pry bar from his belt at the lead enforcer's faceplate hard enough to shatter it, closed the distance on his knee and one hand, and came up with the wrench. 2 more went down. The third managed to draw a molecular blade and cut Curtis Webb across the chest, a deep line from shoulder to opposite hip that would have killed most beings by shock alone. Curtis Webb hit him with the wrench. The 4th ran. The 5th and 6th were still deciding when Curtis Webb reached them. The operations center went quiet. Overseer Tekvaras was in an inner office. He had, per protocol, locked the inner door and sent an emergency signal. He had also, per protocol, activated his personal shield generator, which was a 3rd-generation model salvaged from a Vrethkai warship and calibrated to catch molecular blades at the moment of impact. He was standing behind his desk with a hand disruptor in his 3-fingered grip when the inner door opened. Curtis Webb was bleeding from the collarbone gash, the chest cut, the thigh wound, the ribs, and the broken arm. His left arm was still crooked and still bound. His right hand held the Kreslin pipe wrench. His coveralls were black with blood and coolant, and something that had come off the 5th enforcer. He looked at Overseer Tekvaras across the desk. Tekvaras fired. The bolt hit Curtis Webb in the shoulder. Curtis Webb stepped forward. Tekvaras fired again. The bolt hit Curtis Webb in the same shoulder. Curtis Webb stepped forward. Tekvaras said something in a language Curtis Webb's low-power translator did not catch and dropped the disruptor. He reached for the desk. Under the desk was a panic release that would seal the room in armored plate. Curtis Webb reached across the desk, took Tekvaras by the collar of his ceremonial robe with his good hand, and pulled him bodily over the surface. The Overseer's personal shield activated on contact and dispersed a molecular blade attack that was not happening. It did nothing to slow the pipe wrench. Curtis Webb did not use the wrench. He put the Overseer down on the floor of the operations center, sat on his chest, took the smaller torque driver from the strap across his back, and put it against the joint of the Overseer's shoulder. He said, "Reyes." He said, "Amir." He said the 4 other names. Tekvaras did not know these names. Curtis Webb explained them. The recording at this point was destroyed by the syndicate. What Kesithaval's contact recovered was audio only, from a low-fidelity emergency channel that Tekvaras had opened and abandoned. The audio ran for 11 minutes. On the audio, Overseer Tekvaras confirmed that he had personally flagged the survey vessel out of the Duluth corridor for capture. He confirmed the identity of 2 other syndicate coordinators who had participated in the operation. He confirmed the identity of a 4th party, a shell entity Curtis Webb had not previously known about, that had contracted the syndicate for the human labor pipeline in the first place. This shell entity, Tekvaras said in the audio, had also flagged a Vrethkai sub-commander named Vrethrelax as an accidental purchaser of the flagged lot and had ordered her elimination as a cleanup measure. The shell entity was named on the audio. It was a Kelthari trade minister with a seat on the Compact's own oversight council. Curtis Webb on the audio said, "Say it again, slower. My translator is set to low power and I want to make sure it got the name." Tekvaras said the name again. Curtis Webb said, "All right." The audio recorded next, a sound that was not identifiable to any weapon in the syndicate armory. Then, the audio recorded silence. Then it recorded Curtis Webb's voice, quiet, tired, asking the empty room, "Is there any actual coffee on this station, or is it all grain paste?" Then the audio cut out. Curtis Webb walked out of the operations center in the 4 hours and 11 minutes final quarter. He walked past the wreckage of the outer door, past the 12 bodies of the personal detail, past 2 more syndicate enforcers who had come up the corridor at a run and had turned around at the sight of him, past a cleaning drone that had frozen in place, and back into the service shaft on the north side of the ring. He climbed one-handed down the shaft, with the broken arm still bound to his side. He reached the maintenance dock. He signed out of the shift log under his subcontractor alias, boarded the same coolant tender he had arrived on, and slept for 2 hours on the return trip. The tender pilot did not ask about the blood. The serrated compass met the tender at the halfway rendezvous. Curtis Webb walked through the airlock under his own power. He set the crestline pipe wrench on the deck at Vrethralax's feet. He looked at her with the flat blue eyes of a man who had been at cold water in bad weather all his life. And he said, "The arm needs setting." She sent for a medic. He said, "Not the medic. Get me a splint, a cauterizer, a stitching kit, and a bottle of your strongest sterilizer. I'll do it. Your medic doesn't know human anatomy well enough. I don't want to wake up short a piece." She sent for the kit. He set his own arm. He did it in the ready room, on the low table where she took her morning tea. He asked Kesithval to hold the shoulder steady. He set the bone with a single hard pull, wrapped it in the splint, and moved on to the collarbone gash. He cleaned it with the sterilizer, which he confirmed by smell was harsh enough for human tissue, and closed it with the stitching kit in 9 quick loops. He did the chest cut next. That one took 32 loops and required a break in the middle to breathe. He asked Kesithval for a rag to bite on, and Kesithval, without being asked twice, produced one. Vrethralax stood by the door and watched him remake himself out of pieces. At one point, as he was cauterizing the plasma burn along his ribs with a soldering iron from the tool crib, Kesithval looked away. Curtis Webb said, without looking up, "Don't be delicate. Fill the hole." Kesithval did not know the human idiom. He held the iron steady anyway. When Curtis Webb was done, he was pale, and his face was slick with sweat, and his hands were shaking, and he sat on the floor with his back against the wall and closed his eyes. He said, "I could really use a cup of coffee." Vrethralax sent Kesithval out. Kesithval was gone for 40 minutes. When he came back, he was carrying a small ceramic cup and a battered thermal jug that he had, per his own later admission, obtained from a human freighter crew at the halfway station by trading a Vrethkai ceremonial dagger of some sentimental value. The coffee was bad. It was old, it was overbrewed, it had been carried across 2 shuttle transfers, and it was the color of dredged silt. Curtis Webb drank it in 3 long swallows and said, without opening his eyes, "That's the best coffee I've had in years." He slept for 18 hours. While he slept, Vrethralax filed the report. She did not file it with the syndicate. She did not file it with the Kelthari brokerage. She filed it with the Compact Oversight Council directly, and she filed it with the audio recording of Overseer Thekvaris naming the Kelthari Trade Minister. She filed it under her personal seal. She filed it in the presence of 2 Vrethkai storm priests who owed her mother a favor, and she filed it with a Vrethkai judicial advocate whose reputation was such that no minister of any government had ever successfully bribed him. Within 6 station days, the Kelthari trade minister named on the audio was arrested by his own security detail on the floor of the Compact's Oversight Council, which was a fact of political theatre the Compact would not stop replaying for a full cycle. The Pallid Syndicate was placed under an emergency Compact receivership pending a full investigation of the human labour pipeline. The Kelthari brokerage house that had run the auction on Kelthari Terminal was dissolved. Overseer Thekvaris's remaining assets were seized and distributed to the families of the captured humans, insofar as those families could be traced through the wreckage of the pipeline. The survey vessel's manifest was reconstructed, and the names Reyes, Amir, and 4 others were entered into a compact registry as recognized victims of unlawful trafficking, with, at Vrethralax's specific insistence, brief biographies attached, so that the names would not be simply numbers on a form. The xenobiology file on humanity was updated. Vrethralax updated it herself. She sat at her desk in the ready room, while Curtis Webb, in a bunk 2 decks below, slept off 18 hours of very cheap coffee and 11 surgical closures. And she opened the file, and she read the survey team's assessment, and she deleted it. Under morphology, she left the notes on bone density and cardiac mass and pain response, but she added, high-gravity homeworld selection has produced an organism whose tolerance for injury, exhaustion, and privation is not a curiosity. It is the operating flaw. Under behavior, she deleted the joke about the coffee. Under threat assessment, she deleted the word negligible. She thought about what to type in its place for a long time. She considered the word predator. She considered the word hunter. She considered the word soldier. None of these were right. She thought about the Duluth shore that Curtis Webb had mentioned once, in the tool crib, when she had asked about his sister, the long, cold water of a lake he had grown up beside, the winters that would kill most of her species inside a night, the father who had left him a crestline wrench, and a conviction that a leaking fitting was a personal insult. She thought about the way he had looked at the auction hall, like a man inspecting a broken boiler. She thought about the way he had walked into an operations center with a broken arm and killed 12 trained enforcers and asked, on the way out, about coffee. She typed, furnace work. Then she added a subsection. Under recommended engagement protocols, she wrote, do not capture, do not injure, do not underestimate. If contact is unavoidable, offer coffee. She saved the file. She sent it to the compact registry with a personal cover memo attached under her mother's seal to make certain it would be read. She sat back in her chair. Her tail curled slowly around the chair leg, and this time it stayed there because she wanted it to. Kesith Val entered without knocking. He was carrying a slate. Sub-Commander. Yes, the human has requested upon waking a meeting with you. He has also requested, and I quote, an actual cup of coffee, not a repeat of the previous incident. She said, send for a human freighter, the nearest one. I do not care what the trade is. Have them bring a working supply. Have them show my galley staff how it is prepared. This ship will not run out of human coffee again. Yes, Sub-Commander. Also, bring the human to the ready room when he is up. I will speak with him. Yes, Sub-Commander. Kesith Val paused at the door. Sub-Commander, there is another matter. Report. The Compact Oversight Council has received your filing. They have opened a formal inquiry into the Pallid Syndicate. There are, however, indications that at least one other trade house on the Council was aware of the human labor pipeline and did not report it. The names are at present unclear. The investigation is likely to be long. It is also likely, in the opinion of the judicial advocate, to attract attention from parties who would prefer that the investigation not take place. She said, how much attention? Perhaps a great deal, Sub-Commander. She looked at the wall display, at the updated file, at the words she had typed. She said, Kesith Val. Yes. What do we do with an asset like the human in a situation like that? Kesith Val was quiet for a moment. He said, we ask him. She smiled in the small way her species smiled. It looked to a human like a tightening at the corners of her mouth and a slight lift of the ridges above her eyes. Curtis Webb, when he saw it later, would say it looked like his own mother's smile the morning after his father had come home, safe from a bad shift. And he would say so out loud, and Vrethrelax would not know how to answer him. Curtis Webb came up to the ready room 3 hours later. He was walking with a slight limp. His arm was in the splint. His chest was bandaged under a fresh Vrethkai coverall that had been sized for a human and was, therefore, badly cut around the shoulders. He had shaved. He had, judging by the smell, showered. Kesith Val had personally supervised the delivery of a small ceramic cup and a working thermal press, and a supply of coffee beans from a human freighter that had been persuaded, with a Vrethkai courtesy stipend, to make an unscheduled stop. Curtis Webb accepted the cup. He drank half of it standing. He said, this is a good cup of coffee. Vrethralax said, "It is the correct cup of coffee. I was informed that the previous cup was an incident." He almost smiled. He said, "Yeah, that was an incident." She said, "I have a proposition." "All right. The Compact Oversight Council has opened an investigation into the Pallid Syndicate. There are other parties involved. There are, in the opinion of my legal counsel, likely to be reprisals. There are also, in the opinion of my legal counsel, likely to be more captured humans in more pipelines that we have not yet found. I would like to keep looking." He nodded slowly. "All right. I would like your help." He said, "You want to hire me?" "Yes." "To do what?" "To find the pipelines, to assess them, to decide in each case whether they can be closed by legal filing or whether they require a plumber. To train, in cases where a plumber is required, a small detachment of Vrethkai auxiliaries in the disciplines you use. To advise on a continuing basis my house on matters relating to your species. And when this work is done, to be returned home to Duluth with an escort and a stipend sufficient to purchase your sister a house on the shore of Lake Superior." He looked at her. He said, "That's a lot." "Yes. You could get any of that cheaper." "No, I do not think I could." He drank the rest of the coffee. He set the cup down carefully on the ready room table. He looked at the wall display, where the updated xenobiology file was still open on the recommended engagement protocols section. He read the line about offering coffee. His face did something small. He said, "All right, I'll take the work." She said, "Good." He said, "But we need to talk about a few things." "Say them." He counted on his fingers. "First, I don't work on empty. If we're doing pipelines, I need real food, real sleep, and real coffee. That's a full stop. Second, I'll train your people, but they need to know they're not going to be me. Nobody's going to be me. What they're going to be is competent, and that's enough for what we're doing. Third, if we go into a pipeline and we find humans who are still alive, they come out first. Every time. No exceptions, no delays, no waiting for a legal filing. Fourth, if we go into a pipeline and we find humans who are dead, we get the names. We get every name we can get. We send those names home. Fifth, my sister does not get told about this work. She gets told her brother is working overseas on a big job. She gets a house on the shore. She gets a letter every month in my handwriting. She does not get told the rest until I'm dead or done. And sixth, he paused. Sixth, I need to be able to say no. If you send me at something and I look at it and I say no, that's no. I am not the wrench. I am the guy with the wrench." She said, "Agreed on all six." He offered his good hand. She looked at it, considered the human custom, and reached across the desk. Vrethkai palms had 4 long fingers and a heavy pad. Human palms had 5 short fingers and a broad thumb. The 2 hands did not fit well. They held together anyway, briefly, and then let go. He picked up his empty coffee cup. He said, "I'm going to go fix that atmosphere regulator in the galley. It's still throwing a fault code." She said, "It is not urgent." He said, "It's leaking. That's a personal insult." He walked out. Kesith Val, who had been at parade rest through the entire conversation and was, Vrethralax noticed, no longer unsteady in the fingers, said, "Sub-Commander." "Yes, I will make sure the coffee supply is maintained." "Do. May I also, Sub-Commander, revise the auxiliary personnel file? Under what heading?" "Threat assessment." She said, "Right, friendly." He said, "That is all." She thought about it. She said, "Right, friendly, catastrophic if crossed, keeper of Vrethkai House of Vrethralax. By treaty of mutual respect." He said, "Yes, Sub-Commander." He left. Vrethralax turned back to her desk. On the wall display, the updated xenobiology file was still open. Under the recommended engagement protocols, she had written the line about coffee. Under that line, she added one more. She wrote, "The humans do not conquer worlds, they repair them." She saved the file, she sent it. Below decks in the galley, Curtis Webb of Duluth, Minnesota, 39 years old, furnace technician, catalogued as unskilled labor and sold for 6 trademarks and returned to service under his own name and a new file, was on his back under an atmosphere regulator with a Crestline pipe wrench in his good hand and a rag in his teeth, and he was working the problem. What a journey! The true weapon in this story was never the wrench and never the shield and never the plasma and never the man. It was the quiet, stubborn refusal of a repairman from a cold lakeshore to let a leak stand, whether that leak was a coolant fitting or a whole trafficking pipeline, and the discovery by an ancient alien house that some species answer captivity with patience and a very heavy tool. If you loved this story, leave your like. It is the one thing that keeps stories like this one on the air, out here in the deep quiet. Share it with someone who also loves science fiction, where a small, tired human stands up to something impossibly large and quietly wins. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss the next HFY epic when it drops. And tell me in the comments, if you were in Vrethrelax's chair, would you have hired Curtis Webb to keep working the pipelines with you? Or would you have paid him his stipend, put him on the next ship home to Duluth, and let him spend the rest of his life fixing boilers on the cold shore of Lake Superior? Keep your eyes on the empty out there, and keep looking up at the stars.